Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Zainab stood in front of her gilded mirror, critically assessing her reflection with a half-smile. Her round cheeks and dimpled chin made her look younger than her 29 years, and she often had to fight the assumption that she was still a teenager. Today, the mirror was more than just a reflective surface. It was a symbolic doorway to a future she had dreamed of for most of her life, a future that would officially begin in a matter of days once she said "I do" to her fiancé, Kweku. The swirl of excitement and apprehension tumbling in her stomach felt overwhelming, so she stilled her breathing, letting her chest rise and fall in slow, deliberate motions. Composed. Ready, or so she believed. Her small apartment, located on the outskirts of Accra, was a testament to her carefully curated taste. Warm earth tones accented with bold splashes of color typified her modern African style. On the walls, framed Kent prints from Kumasi served as proud reminders of her heritage. A single large painting in the hallway depicted a woman balancing a basket of fruit on her head, stepping confidently across a bustling market scene. Zainab had always been drawn to symbolism. The painting reflected how she viewed her own life, a balancing act of tradition and modernity, of humility and ambition. She had grown up in Kumasi but had moved to Accra for university, and she stayed after graduating to work at a progressive marketing firm. Here she was, on the verge of establishing her own family, bridging past and future. Kweku came from a more affluent background. His father was a notable real estate magnate in the capital, and his mother was a professor in Cape Coast, known for her extensive research on Ghanaian women's literature. Zainab's parents initially fretted that Kweku's privileged upbringing would clash with their modest roots. Yet, Kweku's gentle manner and genuine respect for Zainab's family won them over. In truth, Zainab believed that Kweku's unique blend of refinement and down-to-earth humility made him irresistible. She admired how he would slip out of formal dinners to buy street wache with her, or how he laughed and tried to dance a zonto at her cousin's wedding, clueless but enthusiastic. Then there was Linda, her closest friend since their secondary school days in Kumasi. Linda had arrived in the capital around the same time as Zainab, attending a private university with a scholarship in sociology. She was now an event planner, a profession that matched her flamboyant flair for detail. Tall and willowy, Linda combined creativity and efficiency in a way Zainab often wished she had. She remembered the first time Linda had helped plan a birthday surprise for Zainab's younger sister. Everything was executed without a hitch, from the color scheme to the hidden dancers who popped out at the final moment. Naturally, Linda was the perfect candidate for maid of honor, an honor she accepted with squeals of delight. Life, it seemed, was perfectly aligned. The wedding was set to take place at a beachfront resort in Kokerbite, a short drive from Accra, an ideal venue for their combination of modern style and African traditions. Zainab's mother had insisted on wearing a matching, vibrant Kent cloth with Zainab's aunties, reflecting the strong family ties that anchored the bride's heart. For her own attire, Zainab had chosen a blend of Western-style wedding gown with subtle African beadwork running across the bodice and trailing into the flowing skirt. Everything, down to the pastel color scheme for the reception, had been meticulously thought out. Yet, just days before the wedding, Linda had been unusually busy, sometimes missing calls or coming up with last-minute changes that didn't quite suit Zainab's taste. Linda's manic energy felt oddly disconnected, and Zainab picked up on hints of tension in Linda's voice whenever Kweku's name was mentioned. Zainab wrote it off as pre-wedding stress. After all, planning a big event could be nerve-wracking, and Linda was juggling everything from the caterers to last-minute guest confirmations. Kweku too seemed distracted. He sometimes responded to her texts with the bare minimum, a thumbs-up emoji or a quick sure. He chalked it up to challenges at his father's company, especially as Kweku was on track to take a more significant role after the wedding. A piece of her heart nagged, suspecting there might be more at play than mere pre-wedding jitters. Zainab's mother would always say, "A woman's intuition is sharper than a needle." Zainab found herself praying more frequently, seeking clarity and peace. She told herself that everyone experiences cold feet or stress before such a monumental life change. Love and trust, she maintained, would see them through. When Linda announced that she had organized a bachelorette party at a chic new rooftop lounge in the heart of Accra, Zainab's excitement returned. The lounge had a panoramic view of the city skyline and the Atlantic coastline beyond. It was the talk of the town, a place where rising celebrities and well-to-do businesspeople came to unwind under the tropical night sky. That Linda had managed to book the venue with only 2 weeks' notice signaled her prowess as an event planner, and possibly a few connections she'd nurtured along the way. Zainab could scarcely wait to gather with her closest friends, celebrating her last days of being single in a stylish, modern African setting. The day of the party, a warm breeze swept through Accra's streets, carrying with it the tangy scent of roasted plantains and fresh pineapples from nearby vendors. As Zainab stepped into the lounge in her gold-toned dress, sparkles from the city lights caught the rhinestones on her collar. She spotted Linda waving enthusiastically, flanked by a small group of women who squealed in unison upon seeing the bride-to-be. The night was vibrant with Afrobeats music surging from hidden speakers, Wizkid's tracks, a bit of Burna Boy, and the occasional Ghanaian highlife number weaving through the crowd. They settled in a roped-off VIP corner, complete with plush sofas and a waiter dedicated to their group's every need. Exotic cocktails in tall glasses were distributed, fruity concoctions with paper umbrellas perched at jaunty angles. Zainab couldn't stop smiling. This was the carefree revelry she needed before plunging into final wedding preparations and the intense swirl of family obligations. She raised her glass in a toast, and her friends joined in boisterous laughter. Across the table, Linda's grin was radiant, though it seemed a touch forced whenever Zainab's gaze lingered. Zainab ignored that tiny niggle of doubt once again. She wrote it off as Linda's typical dramatic flair. If anything, Linda was probably just anxious that everything runs smoothly. But beneath Linda's polished exterior, a tempest was brewing. An entanglement that neither Zainab nor her friends could have predicted. And it would unfold in a manner that defied all of Zainab's carefully laid plans. Little did she know, by the time the sun rose next morning, her life would be rattled by revelations that even her prayers could not have prepared her for. The fateful bachelorette party would become the epicenter of a betrayal, leaving her reeling in the face of heartbreak, confusion, and a creeping sense of danger. The puzzle pieces would slowly reveal themselves, piece by piece, chapter by chapter, leading to a tragic incident, a swirl of chaos, and ultimately, an outcome as unexpected as it was transformative. In that moment, however, surrounded by girlfriends clinking glasses in her honor, Zainab's world was still bright with possibility. The night sky sparkled above Accra, 1,000 stars casting their blessings on the unsuspecting bride-to-be. She allowed herself to believe that love triumphed over all, that the future was secure, and that the bond of friendship and fidelity was unshakable. The rooftop lounge glittered with a kaleidoscope of hues. Neon lights pulsated in time with the music, and the star-dappled sky over Accra offered a sense of limitless possibility. Zainab sat at the center of a plush sofa, giggling with her friends as they recounted fond memories, terrible jokes made in secondary school, heartbreak stories that ended in lessons learned, and dreams they had for the next 5 years of their lives. Linda, perched elegantly beside her, kept the conversation flowing. She teased Zainab about honeymoon destinations. Would she and Kweku prefer a safari in Tanzania or a romantic getaway in the Seychelles? "This night is for you, my dear bride," Linda declared with a sweeping gesture. "I want you to have the time of your life." Bottles of champagne and colorful cocktails lined the low wooden table before them. The lounge's staff, clearly informed of the special occasion, busied themselves to ensure constant refills. Linda, seeming to operate on autopilot, supervised the service like a seasoned conductor overseeing an orchestra. She was good at this. Public celebrations, group laughter, and the transformation of ordinary nights into unforgettable experiences. Yet, if one studied her carefully, one would notice the tension in her smile. Her eyes flickered nervously each time she looked at Zainab. As the group got rowdy, Linda excused herself to the bar, muttering something about verifying the tab. She discreetly took out her phone and glanced at it. On the screen flashed a message from Kweku. Is it done? Make sure she drinks it. Linda's fingers trembled slightly. We need to talk after this, she typed back, quickly deleting and retyping her words multiple times before pressing send. She inhaled deeply, forcing her expression back into that confident event planner facade. Only a week ago, Linda and Kweku had shared a kiss, a secret kiss laced with confusion and guilt. It had happened at an upscale coffee shop, far from prying eyes. Over the months, through wedding meetings and planning sessions, an inexplicable magnetism had grown between them. Linda initially resisted it. After all, Zainab was her best friend and Kweku was off-limits, forever. But something about Kweku's charismatic compliments, the way he looked at her, an intangible connection, pulled her in deeper than she had ever expected. Then, out of the blue, he proposed an outrageous plan: spike Zainab's drink during her bachelorette party as a means to have one final reckless fling without any consequences. Linda initially balked. How could she do this to her best friend? The thought made her stomach churn. But Kweku's whispered persuasions turned into pleas, laced with the twisted logic of a desperate man. We'll be married soon, and I will never have this chance again. Our bond is unique. We owe it to ourselves to explore it just once before I commit entirely. The moral gravity of the betrayal weighed heavily, yet Linda's own tangled emotions battled her conscience. Standing at the bar, Linda's mind replayed Kweku's words over and over. She glanced back at Zainab, who was throwing her head back in laughter at some silly anecdote. She trusts me with her life, Linda thought, feeling an acute stab of shame. With a brisk shake of the head, she signaled the bartender, ordering a special round of cocktails. When the bartender stepped away to fetch garnishes, Linda subtly pulled a small vial from her purse. Her fingers felt cold and slick with sweat as she poured a few drops of an odorless substance into one of the glasses, swirling it gently with a stirrer to camouflage its presence. Moments later, Linda returned to the group with a tray of cocktails. Here we are, ladies. For Zainab, the bride of the night, a special treat with an exotic blend of hibiscus, mango, and a dash of magic, Linda announced, forcing a playful tone. She handed Zainab the spiked drink. Zainab accepted it gratefully, taking a sip. A sweet tang tickled her tongue, leaving a subtle aftertaste she couldn't quite place. Delicious, she proclaimed, eliciting cheers from her friends. Linda sank onto the cushion, her heart pounding loud enough she feared others could hear it. Her eyes flickered toward Zainab, searching for signs of suspicion. But the bride seemed happily oblivious, continuing her conversation as though nothing was amiss. An hour passed in a haze of dancing, selfies, and heartfelt toasts. Zainab started to feel a bit woozy, more than she usually would after just a couple of drinks. Her vision blurred at the edges, and when she tried to stand up to dance along to a popular Afrobeats track, the room spun. Linda rushed to her side, offering support. Are you all right, Zai? Linda asked, placing a hand on the small of Zainab's back. I'm a little lightheaded, Zainab admitted with a weak laugh, chalking it up to wedding stress and the strong cocktails. I'll just need some air. Linda signaled the other friends not to worry, telling them Zainab just needed a break. Steadying her bride-to-be, she guided Zainab toward a quieter section of the rooftop, where clusters of potted bamboo and low lighting offered a semblance of privacy. The city's faint glow illuminated Zainab's face. Her lids were heavy, her breathing a tad uneven. Behind a decorative screen, out of sight from prying eyes, Kweku appeared. He had slipped into the lounge unnoticed, a plan he and Linda had concocted earlier. Linda bit her lower lip, nerves thrumming like a tense guitar string. She had never intended for it to go this far. Part of her hoped Zainab would be too tired to continue, that maybe the plan would fizzle out. Yet, Kweku's face was set in determination, a flicker of excitement dancing in his eyes. Hey, Kweku whispered, stepping forward. Zainab blinked, disoriented, but recognized her fiancé. What are you doing here? She murmured, attempting to clear her mind. Isn't this supposed to be just girls? Surprise? Linda tried to lighten the tension with a forced chuckle. He wanted to come congratulate you personally before the night ended. Kweku nodded, placing an arm gently around Zainab's waist as if to steady her. The trio lingered there in awkward silence as Zainab fought to remain upright and coherent. Voices from the party chatter drifted overhead, overshadowed by the swirling confusion in Zainab's mind. The spiked drink had begun to take a stronger hold, making her limbs feel leaden and her thoughts sluggish. Linda felt an acute sense of foreboding. She had agreed to this, but the reality was far more unsettling than the abstract notion. The plan was that Kweku would take advantage of Zainab's inebriated state to orchestrate a final makeout with Linda, right in Zainab's presence but under the assumption that Zainab wouldn't fully register it. The twisted logic was that Zainab, too intoxicated to understand, would either not remember or remain half-aware, giving Kweku and Linda a moment of reckless passion before the wedding. But Zainab wasn't as far gone as they had hoped or feared. Even though her body was heavy, her mind was fighting. She felt a strange sense that something was off. Why was Kweku here? Why was Linda so tense? Through the fog, she saw the two exchanging glances, as if speaking a silent language. Suddenly, Kweku reached for Linda's hand. The two locked eyes, and in a moment that felt simultaneously drawn out and surreal, they leaned into each other, their faces inches apart. Zainab blinked rapidly, a wave of confusion crashing through her. Was this real, or was she hallucinating from too much drink? Her heart pounded as she witnessed the man she loved and her best friend leaning closer than they ever should. She opened her mouth to speak, to protest, but her tongue felt heavy. Yet in the last possible second before lips touched, Linda jerked away. The weight of her guilt proved too great. A swirl of tears pooled in her eyes, and she let out a choked gasp. I can't do this," she stammered, stepping away from Kweku as if scorched by fire. Kweku's frustration flared. He grabbed Linda's wrist, trying to pull her back, his eyes dark with anger or desperation. It was hard to tell which. Meanwhile, Zainab's knees buckled. Her vision spun. In a panicked move, Linda rushed to steady Zainab, inadvertently knocking into Kweku, causing him to stagger. The carefully orchestrated plan was falling apart at the seams. Linda's eyes darted around, searching for an escape from this disastrous tableau. She could hear Zainab's labored breathing, see Kweku's fuming expression, and feel her own heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to scream, to tear herself away and vanish into the Accra night. Instead, she reached for Zainab's shoulders and whispered, "Hold on, Zai. Let me get you somewhere safe." But fate had already shifted course. Zainab felt a rising nausea, like a tide threatening to engulf her. She swallowed hard, her stomach twisting in knots. She was on the brink of discovering a betrayal that would shatter her faith in both friendship and love. This was just the beginning of a series of unpredictable events that would forever alter the course of her life. In that half-lit corner of a glitzy Accra rooftop lounge, illusions of loyalty and love began to crumble. And though no one could foresee it at the time, the unfolding drama would ultimately lead to an incident both tragic and eye-opening, a pivotal moment that would test them all. The loud thumping of a nearby speaker reverberated through the night as Zainab teetered on the edge of consciousness. Her head felt like it had been filled with cement, and her vision flickered in and out of focus. Each breath felt labored, as if she were attempting to inhale through water. Linda's arms supported her, struggling to keep her upright. Kweku, fueled by adrenaline and frustration, barked instructions at Linda, though the words seemed to pass through a fog. "Let's get her out of here," he snapped, glancing around to ensure none of Zainab's other friends witnessed this unraveling. The plan was to execute the final fling discreetly, but now it threatened to blow up in their faces. If Zainab collapsed or made a scene, questions would be raised, questions neither he nor Linda was prepared to answer. Linda, arms trembling beneath Zainab's weight, nodded. She cast a frantic look over her shoulder, scanning the lounge for an exit route. Most of the guests were still partying near the main deck, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the shadowy corner. Even so, it wouldn't take long for someone to come looking for the bride of the night. They had to move quickly. Bracing themselves, Kweku and Linda supported Zainab's staggering steps as they guided her to the elevator. Zainab made a weak attempt to speak, but all that emerged were slurred syllables. A wave of panic washed over Linda as she imagined the worst. What if we gave her too much? What if she's having a bad reaction? She bit her lip to stifle the onslaught of guilt-ridden tears. Once in the elevator, the three descended to the street level in tense silence. The neon lights of the lounge flickered behind them as they stepped out into the humid Accra night, the sky awash with faint moonlight that did little to soothe Linda's jangled nerves. As prearranged, Kweku's driver waited in a sleek, black SUV by the curb. He jumped out to open the door, eyes discreetly averted as his employer and Linda half-dragged, half-carried the unconscious bride-to-be into the backseat. Linda's heart hammered as the driver sped away from the lounge. She asked Kweku, voice trembling, "Where are we taking her?" She dreaded the answer, recalling the earlier plan, a discreet hotel or a side apartment Kweku sometimes used for business. The mere thought made her stomach turn. "Calm down," Kweku hissed, trying to maintain control. "We need to let her recover somewhere quiet, away from prying eyes. Then we'll figure it out." Zainab mumbled incoherently, her head lolling against the car seat. Linda reached out, stroking her friend's hair in a gesture of comfort, though she felt anything but calm. She realized, in that moment, the monstrous nature of what they'd done. No matter how Kweku had rationalized it, this was a betrayal of the worst sort, one that had placed Zainab's health and emotional well-being at risk. They pulled into a gated compound in an upscale neighborhood of Accra. The house belonged to Kweku's older cousin, currently out of the country on business. It was a modern villa, complete with tall glass walls, manicured lawns, and an imposing metal gate. Under normal circumstances, Linda might have admired the architectural brilliance. Tonight, it felt ominous, an ivory cage of secrets. The driver assisted in carrying Zainab inside, laying her gently on a plush sofa in the airy living room. Soft, recessed lights illuminated Linda's pale, trembling face and Kweku's rigid posture. Zainab's breathing was shallow but steady. Linda's first priority was to check Zainab's pulse. She recalled some basic first aid training from her event planning days. The pulse was there, weak, but discernible. "She'll be fine," Kweku muttered, pacing the floor. He pulled at the collar of his designer shirt, as though it had become too tight. Linda knelt by Zainab, cradling her friend's head. Linda's conscience screamed at her, demanding an explanation for how she allowed herself to become complicit in such treachery. But even in the haze of guilt, another emotion flared within her, anger. Anger at Kweku for manipulating her, at herself for allowing it, and at the twisted illusions of romance that had led her down this path. "Kweku," she began, her voice low and tight. "We need to take her to a hospital." "I'm worried." He snapped around, his expression a mixture of panic and defiance. "Absolutely not. We can't risk it. What do we say if the hospital staff gets suspicious? They'll ask questions. We'll ruin everything. Our wedding, or my wedding at least, will be destroyed by rumors and scandal." Linda felt her heart clench. This is bigger than a wedding. If something happens to her... "She'll be fine," Kweku interrupted, more insistent. He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. "Look, we just need to let her rest. She's probably had too much to drink. That's what we'll say if anyone asks. You know how these bachelorette parties can go." He attempted a dismissive shrug, though the tremor in his hands belied his cavalier tone. Unable to argue further without escalating the tension, Linda fell silent. A swirl of conflicting thoughts clouded her mind. How to care for Zainab, how to keep up appearances, and how to reconcile her guilt with the knowledge of what she'd nearly done. Minutes turned into an hour, and Zainab stirred slightly, moaning as if in pain. Linda rushed to get a damp cloth, pressing it gently to Zainab's forehead. The bride's eyelids fluttered open for a moment, confusion etched across her features. "Well, am I?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Shoo, it's okay," Linda soothed, forcing a small smile. "You fainted from too much stress and, well, the drinks, maybe. We brought you somewhere to rest." Zainab blinked, her gaze zigzagging from Linda to Kweku, who stood nearby, arms folded tight. She tried to sit up, but her muscles were limp. A spasm of nausea overtook her, and Linda hurried to grab a waste bin. Zainab retched weakly, tears of discomfort brimming in her eyes. "Zai," Kweku said, kneeling beside her, "just relax, okay? We didn't want to worry everyone at the party, So we brought you here. We'll get you home soon. She stared at him, trying to piece together the fractured memories. Something about seeing Linda and Kweku together, too close, the fleeting sensation that something was very wrong. Yet her mind was too foggy to latch onto specifics. She felt as if she were tumbling through a half-remembered nightmare. An abrupt jolt broke the tense atmosphere. Linda's phone buzzed with repeated calls. Friends from the Bachelorette party? No doubt, wondering where the bride and her maid of honor had vanished to. Kweku motioned for Linda to answer. Linda stepped aside, pressing the phone to her ear. Yes, Amma, she said, recognizing the voice of Zainab's cousin. We're so sorry for leaving abruptly. Zainab got sick, probably the cocktails. We took her home, she's resting now. She forced as casual a tone as she could muster, ignoring her trembling hands. Amma sighed, relief evident in her voice. Oh, thank goodness. We were worried. Is she okay? She just needs sleep. You know how these nights can get, Linda lied, hoping her voice sounded convincing. Ending the call, Linda let out a shaky breath. Outside, the night was wearing thin. Dawn would soon creep over the horizon. Under normal circumstances, she and Zainab would be huddled in bed, exhausted from dancing and laughter, recounting every funny moment from the party. Instead, they were in a borrowed villa, hearts pounding with fear and guilt. Zainab's eyes drifted closed again. Linda looked to Kweku, who was leaning against a glass wall, running his fingers through his hair in agitation. In that moment, Linda made a silent vow. She would not let this proceed any further. Whatever Kweku believed they should do next, Linda had reached her limit. The intangible line she'd crossed tonight must never be crossed again. All the while, fate was weaving a bigger, more tragic tapestry. Unbeknownst to them, Zainab's body was reacting more severely to the substance she had ingested. What they chalked up as mere drunkenness could spiral into something far more dangerous. And in the days to come, truths would be forced into the light, relationships would tear, and a tragedy would unfold, one that would overshadow every plan, every vow, and every ounce of trust that once defined their bond. For now, though, the quiet hush of the upscale villa enveloped them like a dense fog, offering temporary concealment from the storm that threatened to shatter everything. Zainab awoke to the muted hum of air conditioning and a throbbing headache that pulsed behind her eyelids. The room was unfamiliar, its walls adorned with abstract art and expensive-looking light fixtures. She tried to sit up, but her body felt as though it had been run over by a truck. A spike of panic flared in her chest. Where was she? Why wasn't she in her own bed? Memory came in disjointed flashes. Linda handing her a vibrant cocktail, dizziness overwhelming her, Kweku appearing, and then darkness. She pressed a hand to her temple, struggling to piece it all together. Her gaze drifted across the spacious living room until it landed on Linda, dozing in an armchair. Nearby, Kweku paced, phone in hand, face etched with frustration. The tension in the air was palpable, and the sight of them in the same space made something in Zainab's gut twist uncomfortably. Stirring from her doze, Linda noticed Zainab awake. She jumped up, crossing the floor in quick strides. Zai, how do you feel? Zainab's throat felt parched. Sick, so sick, she rasped. What happened? Kweku stepped in, voice low but attempting a soothing tone. You passed out at the party. We didn't want to cause a scene, so we brought you here to rest. Are you okay now? Blinking blearily, Zainab examined both of them. Questions burned in her mind, but each one felt heavy, like it would shatter the fragile moment. For now, she nodded shakily. I just need water, she managed. Linda hurried to the kitchen, returning with a tall glass of water. Zainab drank in small sips, grateful for the relief on her dry throat. Meanwhile, Kweku insisted she stay on the couch. You should rest. We'll take you home soon. As the morning light spilled through the glass walls, reality intruded. The wedding was only days away, there were final arrangements to confirm, extended family to host, and an entire swirl of responsibilities that demanded Zainab's attention. Yet here she was, in a strange living room, feeling utterly disoriented. She cast Linda a look, noticing the dark circles under her friend's eyes. Linda looked as though she had not slept a wink, Her usual vivacity dulled into a sullen worry. Zainab reached for Linda's hand. "Thank you," she said softly, sincerity and confusion mingling in her tone. "I'm sorry if I ruined the bachelorette party." Linda's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. She forced a small laugh. "Don't be silly, Zai. I just want you to be okay." While the women spoke, Kweku's phone buzzed incessantly with messages. He sighed, stepping away to handle business. Just as he put the phone to his ear, Zainab reached out, gently tugging on Linda's wrist. "What's going on?" she asked in a hushed voice. "Why do I feel like something is off?" Linda's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to confess everything right then, to pour out her guilt and beg for forgiveness. But fear clamped down on her voice, and she remained silent. Instead, she offered a half-truth. "You had a reaction to something, maybe the drink was too strong. Let's just get you home. We can talk later, okay?" Zainab nodded slowly, feeling that Linda was withholding something. Yet the pounding ache in her head dissuaded her from pressing further. She needed time to process, time to let her body recover and her thoughts settle. Within the hour, Kweku's driver pulled up again. They helped Zainab into the car. The ride to her apartment was silent, but for the occasional directions Linda murmured to the driver. Zainab rested her head against the cool window, watching the bustling across streets flash by. Hawkers with trays of sachet water and plantain chips wove between cars. The city was already wide awake, humming with life. Yet inside the car, the tension was thick enough to choke on. When they arrived at Zainab's apartment, Linda insisted on escorting her inside while Kweku waited in the car, fielding calls. Linda sat on the edge of Zainab's bed, helping her change into comfortable clothes. Once done, Zainab sank into her pillows, exhaustion settling in her bones. "Do you want me to stay?" Linda asked quietly. Zainab closed her eyes, exhaling shakily. "I think I should rest alone for a bit. Let's talk later, okay?" Linda understood. She gave Zainab's hand a gentle squeeze. "Promise me you'll call if you need anything." Nodding in weary agreement, Zainab watched Linda leave, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. Something about last night gnawed at her. She could not dismiss the image of Linda and Kweku close together, that tense moment that had flashed before her eyes. Was it real or a delirious vision born of intoxication? She couldn't be sure, but the nagging doubt lingered. Meanwhile, Linda found Kweku outside by the car, finishing up a call. The moment he saw her, his eyes narrowed. "This is all your fault," he muttered harshly, voice low enough that the driver wouldn't overhear. "If you had just gone through with the plan." Linda cut him off, voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Don't you dare blame me for your twisted idea. You wanted a final fling? You can't even handle the mess we're in now. Zainab's health was at risk. Quick! We should have never done this." He scoffed. "We didn't do anything, thanks to your change of heart. Now we have to deal with consequences." His gaze was venomous. "And if Zainab ever finds out, you think she's only going to blame me? Think carefully, Linda. You're just as culpable." Her cheeks burned with shame and fury. She wanted to lash out, to scream that it was Kweku who had seduced her, who had initiated this vile plot. But deep down, she knew he was right. She had betrayed Zainab, no matter how conflicted her heart had been. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. "I'll never forgive myself for this," she whispered. "But I'm done. I'm not covering up anything further. I suggest you find a way to fix this before the wedding." Kweku stepped closer, voice dripping with quiet menace. "Fix it? If it becomes unfixable, then we both go down. You might want to remember that." With that, he slid into the back seat of the car. Linda watched him go, her mind reeling. She recalled the childhood days when she and Zainab had played hopscotch in the dusty courtyard of their school in Kumasi, sharing groundnuts and giggling over secret crushes. How had she fallen so far from that innocent camaraderie to this destructive betrayal? Over the next couple of days, Zainab stayed mostly indoors, recuperating from what she believed to be a bad hangover or possible food poisoning. Linda busied herself finalizing wedding arrangements while dodging Kweku's calls. Each time Linda saw a family member or friend, the weight of her guilt pressed down even more. She plastered on a smile, gave directions to caterers and decorators, but her heart was in turmoil. Kweku kept up appearances, all the while ensuring Zainab was physically well enough for the big day. He showered her with concerned calls and check-ins, hoping the show of care would mask his involvement in her mysterious illness. Zainab appreciated it, but she noticed he was more guarded, sometimes overly attentive in a way that felt rehearsed. Something was amiss, but in the rush of final wedding details, fittings, venue checks, a flurry of visiting relatives, Zainab had little time to dwell on her suspicions. Yet the feeling of unease refused to dissipate. The wedding was fast approaching, and a sense of dread enveloped Linda and Kweku. Zainab, unaware of the full scope of betrayal, pushed herself to finalize every detail of the ceremony and reception. She told herself her worries were just wedding jitters, but her heart wasn't convinced. Behind the scenes, fate orchestrated another twist. Zainab's body still bore the effects of the drug. Unpredictable symptoms and vulnerabilities lurked beneath the surface. And as the wedding date drew closer, an unplanned chain of events would spiral into a tragedy none of them saw coming, forever altering the bonds they thought unbreakable. The day before the wedding dawned warm and bright, with the sun shimmering over Accra's skyline. Zainab stood in her living room, instructing the decorators on where to place the final floral arrangements. Lilies and hibiscus in coral and cream hues would adorn the entrance to the beachside venue, forming a gentle contrast against the turquoise waves. Her phone buzzed incessantly, family members arriving from other regions needed directions, her mother fretted about the correct fabric for the bridesmaids, and the photographer wanted confirmation on the schedule for pre-wedding shots. Zainab's headache had subsided, but her heart still felt heavy, as though something vital was off-kilter. In the swirl of wedding preparations, she pushed it aside. Only once, late the previous evening, she almost confronted Linda about the strange tension between her and Kweku. But the chance slipped away in the chaos of last-minute errands. At midday, she finally found a moment to breathe. The decorator had left, the calls had slowed, and she could focus on collecting herself. Slipping on a pair of sandals, she decided to visit the beachfront venue at Kokerbite, her final pre-wedding check. Maybe the rhythmic lullaby of the ocean would soothe her unsettled mind. As she arrived, the ocean breeze caressed her skin. Workers were setting up a grand canopy, under which guests would sit. The dais for the couple stood just a few meters from the shoreline, offering a panoramic view of the sea. The gentle crash of waves reminded Zainab of childhood vacations, her father teaching her how to swim, her mother warning about the strength of the undertow. She walked along the sand, letting the sun's rays warm her shoulders. Suddenly, her phone rang. She expected it to be another vendor, but the caller ID displayed Linda's name. She hesitated before answering, heart fluttering with anxiety she couldn't explain. "Hello." Linda's voice trembled. "Zai, can we talk? I need to tell you something important." Zainab's entire body tensed. "Sure, Linda. Are you okay?" The pause. Linda's breath hitched. "Not really. Meet me at the cafe near your place in an hour?" Zainab nodded, even though Linda couldn't see her. "All right, I'll be there." Ending the call, Zainab's mind raced through 1,000 possibilities. Why now, on the eve of her wedding? Was this about the fiasco at the Bachelorette party? Fear coiled in her gut, but she summoned her resolve. Maybe it was nothing more than pre-wedding nerves. An hour later, Zainab slid into a chair at the small, cozy cafe. The aroma of fresh Ghanaian coffee beans hung in the air, mixed with the sweetness of pastries. Linda arrived soon after, her face etched with worry, dark circles still lingering beneath her eyes. They exchanged a tense greeting, and Linda ordered a bottle of water, ignoring the pastries on display. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, the hum of the cafe's overhead fans making it feel more oppressive than cooling. Zainab watched Linda's trembling hands and decided to extend an olive branch. "Linda, I know we've both been stressed, but it's almost over. Tomorrow, everything will be fine." Linda burst into tears. Zainab froze in shock as her best friend covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. The stares of curious patrons prickled Zainab's skin, so she leaned forward and whispered, "Let's step outside." They left the cafe and found a quiet spot near a potted palm. Linda wiped her tears with a tissue. "Zai," She began, voice trembling. I've done something terrible. I don't know how to tell you, but I can't go on pretending. Zainab's heart pounded. Memories of the bachelorette party flitted across her mind. The spiked drink. Kweku showing up unexpectedly. That weird, almost intimate moment she thought she'd seen between them. Linda, you're scaring me, she managed. Linda's breathing hitched. You remember how you felt so sick at the party? It wasn't just the cocktails. You spiked your drink? A stunned silence fell. Zainab's lips parted in disbelief. She forced a laugh of shock. Linda, this can't be funny. What are you talking about? Tears slid down Linda's cheeks. I'm not joking. Kweku convinced me it was for some twisted reason. He said he wanted one last fling. Zainab reeled, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what she was hearing. She felt a roaring in her ears, as if the ocean at Kokrobite had taken up residence in her skull. You drugged me? So that he could? Linda nodded miserably. We planned it so you wouldn't remember. But I couldn't go through with it. I froze. Everything fell apart, and we just took you away before anyone noticed. Zainab's knees weakened. She reached out to steady herself against the wall. Rage, betrayal, and heartbreak collided in a swirling vortex in her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her best friend, her maid of honor, had assisted her fiancé in a plot to drug her for a final makeout with Linda. How could you? She managed, voice cracking. Have you been with him behind my back? Linda's tear-filled eyes darted away. He kissed. It was a lapse in judgment. He said it didn't have to mean anything, that he'd still marry you. I swear, Zai, I regret it so much. I've been dying every day since. Zainab sank onto a nearby bench, head in her hands. The weight of the betrayal was suffocating. Kweku, her partner, the man she thought she knew, was capable of such cruelty. And Linda, her childhood friend, had aided him. Tears stung her eyes, but a quiet fury began to simmer. You almost destroyed my life, Zainab whispered. Don't you realize what you've done? You endangered me. You risked my health, my trust, everything. Linda could only sob. I know, Zai. I'm so sorry. For a long while, neither spoke. The din of traffic and the chatter of cafe customers drifted by like a distant dream. Finally, Zainab straightened, a newfound steel in her spine. I can't believe you've waited this long to tell me. The wedding is tomorrow, Linda. Tomorrow? Linda clutched Zainab's hand in desperation. That's why I had to tell you now. I can't stand by and watch you marry him under false pretenses. You have a right to know. Zainab inhaled sharply, tears brimming in her eyes. I need to figure this out, she said, rising from the bench with trembling legs. Her mind raced. Should I confront Kweku now? Should I cancel the wedding? How will my family react? The ramifications were too vast, too overwhelming to digest on the spot. Turning to Linda, she asked, Does anyone else know? Linda shook her head. No. I told you the truth first. No one else. Zainab nodded woodenly. She looked at her friend, the woman who had been a sister in all but blood. Any sense of warmth and camaraderie had been replaced by a deep, searing betrayal. Leave me alone, she said softly. I need space. Don't call me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Linda opened her mouth to protest but quickly closed it. Guilt and sorrow hung heavy in the air. She stepped away, tears still staining her cheeks. I'll respect your wishes, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Zainab watched Linda walk away, her own thoughts swirling in painful chaos. The wedding was imminent. Hundreds of guests were expected, family from across Ghana and beyond. She stared at her phone, feeling the crushing weight of the final decision resting on her shoulders. By the time she returned to her apartment, night had fallen. She slipped into her bedroom, ignoring the calls and texts from well-wishers and relatives asking about final details. After locking the door, she collapsed onto her bed, sobs racking her body. The man she loved had plotted to drug her, aided by the friend she trusted most. What am I supposed to do now? Yet destiny had one more card to play, a tragic event no one saw coming, something that would tear open secrets and force everyone to face the terrible fallout of their deeds. Zainab would wake to a day that was supposed to mark the beginning of a joyous union, only to be confronted by heartbreak, chaos, and the dire consequences of betrayal. The wedding day dawned with a sky brushed in soft pink and orange hues, an ethereal beauty that contrasted the storm raging within Zainab's heart. She barely slept, mind consumed by Linda's revelations. By early morning, messages poured in, family members posting pictures of themselves en route to the beach, friends sharing their excitement on social media. The entire city seemed to buzz with anticipation for the union of Zainab and Kweku. Zainab stared at her wedding dress, the delicate beadwork shimmering in the early light. She touched the fabric, remembering how excited she'd been to wear it. Now it felt like a costume for a life she no longer recognized. Around 7 a.m., a frantic banging rattled her front door. She had just slipped on a simple robe, preparing to call her mother and break the heartbreaking news. But the banging continued relentlessly, accompanied by a voice she recognized, Amma, her cousin. Opening the door, she was met by Amma's pale, terrified face. "Zainab, hurry. It's Linda. She's in the hospital." Zainab's heart dropped. "Hospital? What happened?" Amma shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Car accident, early this morning. She was rushing, maybe distracted. No one's sure. They found her unconscious. The doctors say it's critical." All thoughts of confrontation with Linda vanished. "Which hospital?" Zainab demanded, already slipping on shoes. "Korolbu Teaching Hospital," Amma replied. In a flurry of urgency, Zainab and Amma rushed out, forgetting even to lock the apartment properly. The morning traffic was mercifully light, and they arrived at the hospital within half an hour. The waiting area was crowded, families of patients milling about, hospital staff moving briskly. Amma guided Zainab to a private corner where Linda's parents stood, tear tracks staining their cheeks. Upon seeing Zainab, Linda's mother burst into renewed sobs. Zainab approached, her own emotions in tumult. Despite the betrayal, Linda was still one of the most important people in her life. Does she even have time? Is she okay? The news was grim. Linda had sustained severe head trauma. The doctors were operating on her, but the prognosis was uncertain. Zainab's stomach churned as guilt layered atop her existing heartbreak. We argued. I told her to leave me alone. Was she rushing somewhere because of me? Kweku arrived soon after, face ashen. He looked at Zainab but avoided meeting her eyes. The tension was a physical presence between them. She had so much to say, accusations, questions about his plot to drug her, but the gravity of Linda's condition overshadowed everything. Hours crawled by, a tortured vigil in the hospital corridors. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling off his surgical mask. He explained that Linda was stable for the moment, though she remained in a coma. Her condition was precarious. Immediate family and only one visitor at a time could see her. Zainab closed her eyes, relief and sorrow warring within her. She was allowed to step into the ICU for a brief moment. Linda lay there, pale and bandaged, tubes and machines beeping softly. The sight tore at Zainab's heart. Betrayal or not, Linda was family in spirit. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "Why did it have to come to this?" Stepping out, she found Kweku waiting, expression grim. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry for what happened to Linda. It's a terrible tragedy." His voice was subdued, but Zainab detected the undercurrent of tension. She looked him in the eye for the first time since her conversation with Linda. "Yes. Terrible," she murmured. "Just like the plot you two concocted to drug me." Unsure how much Linda had confessed, Kweku stood there, fists clenching and unclenching. "We should talk about the wedding." Zainab gave a hollow laugh. "The wedding? You still want to go through with it?" He hesitated. "Everyone is here. It's all set. Linda would have wanted us to." Rage flared in Zainab's eyes. "Don't you dare bring her name into this right now," she hissed. "You and I both know the wedding is the least of our worries." He glanced around, noticing Linda's parents and a few family friends not far away. Leaning in, he whispered, "Not here. Let's go somewhere private." Zainab followed him out to an empty corridor near a vending machine. She crossed her arms. "Linda told me everything," she said bluntly. About how you spiked my drink, how you planned to, she choked on the words. Kweku's face blanched. He looked around to ensure no one was within earshot. She told you? Yes, all of it, Zainab spat. How could you do that to me? I loved you, trusted you, and you treated me like I was disposable. Kweku struggled to keep his composure. Zai, it was a mistake. I was. A mistake, she repeated, voice taut with pain. A mistake is forgetting to pick up groceries, not plotting with my best friend to drug me so you could have one final secret fling. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking straight. Zainab let silence fill the space. She sensed the weight of his apology was more about getting caught than true remorse. After a few agonizing heartbeats, she spoke again, her voice quivering. I can't marry you. Not after this. Kweku's head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. Think about the guests, your family. My family. The invitations. The expenses, everything is in motion. Zainab let out a shuddering breath. I'd rather endure the shame of a cancelled wedding than tie myself to a man who betrayed me so heinously. He grabbed her hand, desperation etched on his face. Zai, please. We can work this out. I promise, after the wedding, I'll make it right. She wrenched her hand away. Make it right? The only right thing to do is face the consequences. I won't keep silent. If you want to salvage any dignity, I suggest you tell your family the wedding is off. I'll do the same on my end. Tears stung her eyes, but she stood firm, squared her shoulders. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. A woman's worth isn't measured by the ring on her finger, but by the dignity in her heart. She brushed past him, heading back to the waiting room. The next few hours were a blur of uneasy explanations, hushed phone calls, and shocked relatives. Some tried to persuade Zainab to reconsider, citing the enormous scandal that would ensue. Others assumed she was canceling due to Linda's accident, not knowing the darker truth. In a stroke of composure that belied her turmoil, Zainab formally announced that, due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding was postponed until further notice. Guests who had traveled long distances were assured their accommodation and hospitality would still be covered, but there would be no ceremony at Kokerbite. The hush of confusion and disappointment settled in every corner. As the day wore on, Zainab returned to Linda's bedside. She placed a gentle hand on Linda's bandaged arm, tears slipping down her cheeks. We'll get through this, she whispered, voice trembling. I don't know how, but we have to. And if you ever wake up, maybe we can find a way to talk about forgiveness. But please, just wake up first. 3 days passed, each bringing Linda small improvements. She remained in a coma but showed signs of responsiveness, tiny twitches of her fingers, fluctuations in her vitals. Zainab practically lived at the hospital, coordinating with Linda's parents, stepping out occasionally to console relatives and friends confused about the cancelled wedding. During this period, Kweku's calls and texts went unanswered. Zainab refused to see him, to the point where her brothers stood guard if Kweku appeared at the hospital. The fiancé, soon-to-be ex, became the subject of hushed gossip, but no one knew the full story except Zainab and, presumably, Linda. A week later, Linda finally opened her eyes. The relief that flooded everyone was immeasurable. She was weak, disoriented, but alive. Zainab sat at her bedside, tears of gratitude slipping free. You're back, she said, voice breaking. Thank God. Linda's eyes darted around, confusion evident. She tried to speak, but the words came out as a rasp. Finally she managed, Zai, eat here. Zainab squeezed her hand. Always, she murmured, though her heart still bore the scars of betrayal. Over the next days, Linda regained more of her faculties. Doctors confirmed there would be a long road of physical therapy ahead, but her mental faculties seemed intact. Zainab spent countless hours by Linda's side, assisting her with small tasks, reading her messages, helping her catch up on the swirl of events she had missed. In a quiet moment, Linda gazed at Zainab, tears forming. Why are you being so kind after what I did? Zainab sighed, swallowing a knot of emotion. Because life is precious, Linda. You almost lost yours. I was betrayed, yes, and I still feel that pain. But hatred won't heal either of us. Linda sobbed quietly, apologizing over and over. Zainab responded with a gentle hush. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," she admitted, "but maybe we can find a new path forward, one built on truth, no matter how ugly that truth is." The unpredictably tragic chain of events ended up sparing Zainab a lifelong entanglement with a man who saw her as expendable. It also forced Linda to confront the consequences of betrayal head-on, forging a new resolve to live with integrity. In a final, professional closure that surprised everyone, Zainab went public. She issued a composed statement, acknowledging that the wedding was cancelled due to irreconcilable differences and citing concerns about personal well-being and respect. She made no mention of the drugging or affair, choosing to handle it legally and privately behind the scenes. Kweku's reputation took a hit when word leaked that Zainab had broken off the engagement on moral grounds. His father's real estate empire tried to spin a narrative about incompatibility, but the rumor mill in Accra was relentless. Gossip magazines speculated, but Zainab and Linda stayed silent. The truth existed between them, a lesson carved in heartbreak and nearly in blood. Months later, Linda's rehabilitation continued, and Zainab pressed charges for the assault. The legal process began discreetly. Through her lawyers, Zainab demanded accountability from Kweku for spiking her drink, an act that in Ghanaian law fell under serious offense. Linda, too, was named an accomplice but cooperated with authorities fully, providing a statement that placed the bulk of responsibility on Kweku's manipulations. In a surprising twist, Zainab's influence convinced prosecutors to offer Linda a chance at community service instead of a harsh sentence, citing her regret and her accident's impact as extenuating circumstances. Zainab also sought therapy, determined not to let this traumatic chapter define her future. Her professional life flourished. She channeled her pain into her marketing career, earning accolades and promotions. Over time, she regained her sense of self-worth, free from the illusions of a marriage that would have destroyed her. As for Linda, she remained forever changed. The friendship she once had with Zainab was now tentative, weighed down by caution. But over time, there were glimmers of hope, shared smiles in hospital corridors, heartfelt text messages checking in on each other's families. A seed of trust might one day sprout again, watered by sincere remorse and earnest forgiveness. Life in modern Accra marched on, full of vibrant energy and the never-ending swirl of progress. In the end, Zainab's life story continued, not as the bride she once planned to be, but as a strong African woman who refused to be defined by betrayal. And though tragedy and unpredictability had marred what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, she emerged with her dignity intact, forging a professional and unwavering closure that signaled hope and growth for all involved. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.